All right, welcome folks to the PT on Ice Daily Show brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. My name is Dustin Jones with the lead faculty within the older adult division. Today, we're going to talk about minimal footwear in older adults. Is minimal footwear good for older adults? What do we need to know as clinicians? What do we need to be prepared for as folks are going to start to ask more and more and more about those funky barefoot style shoes that they're getting all the ads for? So I want to start just by framing up this conversation by acknowledging some of the limitations of the current conversations going around related to minimalist footwear, barefoot style shoes, whatever it may be, right? Let's kind of get some definitions first before we go into this. So, when I say minimal footwear, what I'm talking about is a shoe that has a shot or last that has the same shape as a foot. So the toe box is typically going to be a little bit wider. Many of these shoes are going to have a relatively low slope or no slope going from the thickness of the heel to the thickness of the forefoot. Many of them are zero drop shoes. They're also going to be very flexible. So this is a zero shoe for those that are watching that I can basically roll up. This is one example of a minimal or barefoot style shoe. And so, Zero shoes, XERO, Vivo Barefoot is another one. Merrill makes several different types. Limbs, there's all kinds of different companies, right? You all are probably getting tons of ads for these, and you're probably getting sold a lot of benefits that are probably going to be a little overhyped, right? I'm definitely guilty of this, but I was one of probably the most dogmatic clinicians about barefoot running, about barefoot style shoes. I read Born to Run, back in, what was it, 2011 is when I read that book. Just became enamored with the story that Chris McDougall told. I started to work at the first minimalist shoe store in the country, Two Rivers Treads in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. Man, I drank the Kool-Aid hard. And anyone that would come into the store, I would try and sell the gospel of barefoot running and barefoot shoes. We would even sell shoes without wearing them. All the salespeople on the floor would be barefoot trying to sell folks, $200 pairs of shoes. So that was kind of my origin. Over the years, as you get more familiar with the research and see, these shoes, it's not all it's cracked up to be, right? I mean, there's so many benefits that are sold that the research has not necessarily painted that clear picture, that they can be helpful, they can be good, but they're not going to, have a cure for cancer. They're not going to solve all your ailments and all your aches and pains. It's not kind of the end all be all that many people will believe it to be. But one thing that has been kind of sticking in my head and something I've been thinking a lot about over the past several years is that when we talk about barefoot style shoes, 9 times out of 10, that whole conversation is related to active individuals and preferentially to runners, folks that are regularly running, that are transitioning to a more kind of natural or minimal style shoe, and talking about, how does that change their mechanics? How does that influence their injury rates? What are some of the on-ramp programs that we can do to reduce the risk of injury? And who is completely void in this conversation are the folks that may potentially, right, benefit the most, and that's older adults. You do not see a lot of literature. There's some studies that are looking at the influence of minimal style footwear in older adults, but by and large, it's in active, healthy individuals that typically are runners. And I'm very excited to share with you a recent publication that looks into what minimalist shoes can do for older adults. Because I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation. And what I perceive, what I kind of predict is that this area is going to kind of be like how we talk about fitness for older adults as well. If you've been to any of the MMOA courses, we frame up the question of who's going to benefit more from the fitness forward approach. Is it going to be kind of the younger, already relatively active individual that may already be exercising and they're relatively healthy? Like when you give that person that properly dosed deadlift, barbell deadlift, are they going to be impacted as much as if you hand that barbell that's appropriately dosed and modified to the older adult that is relatively deconditioned, who's at a risk for falling, who has not done resistance training in their life? Like who's going to benefit more, especially early on in that process? And I'm always going to put my money on that older adult. They're going to see more significant gains in a shorter period of time. They're going to see a more significant impact in their overall quality of life. that's kind of that fitness forward. Who's going to benefit the most? It's usually older adults, and I predict that we're going to see a similar story be told with minimal footwear, because many older adults they have traditionally, when you look at some of their size of their foot intrinsic muscles, for example, typically they're relatively atrophied compared to their active norms, to their active peers. Folks that are relatively fit, they typically have smaller intrinsic, foot muscles, typically have more issues with balance. So when we take those individuals and put them in an environment that a minimal foot shoe can provide, that is a greater stressor to that environment and situation, I'm predicting that they are going to probably benefit a little bit more. We're going to see some substantial changes in some of their anatomy, and hopefully in some of their function as well, because they're relatively deconditioned. It's like giving that barbell deadlift to that individual that's never touched a weight before. That's what this could be for that individual in terms of implementing minimal footwear in their everyday life. So the study that I want to talk about is it's a part of a long going study that has not been published yet. So there's a study going on right now that has 3 different arms. Around 25 older adults are going to be in each arm. One arm is a control group that is not receiving any intervention. Another arm is individuals that are wearing minimalist style footwear. And then the third arm is a group of older adults that are just doing kind of foot intrinsic strengthening exercises. And they're tracking a whole host of different outcome measures. They're looking at their balance via mini best tests. They're actually doing ultrasound of looking at the cross-sectional area of some of their foot, intrinsic muscles to see, are they getting any hypertrophy effects as a result? They're doing some different subjective reports of their fear of falling, of their perceived balance and steadiness, doing some other strength measures as well. So they're doing this over a long period of time. They went ahead and published a study that I'm going to talk about now, where they mainly looked at kind of the cross-sectional area of the foot intrinsic muscles. So did the muscles get bigger over a 16-week period? And what are the perceptions of minimal footwear in these older adults? All right. So that was the 2 main goals of this study. So they tracked those things over a 16-week period. So I would say a relatively short period of time. And I want to just paint a picture of who was in this study, so we have a better idea, because I think it makes it really interesting when you start to read this. So the folks that were in this study, they were over 65. They all had at least over a 12-second timed up and go. Typically, you'll see that cutoff for an increased falls risk is going to be 14 seconds, but all these folks had over 12 seconds. So from the functional standpoint, they're really flirting with that line of likely an elevated risk of falling. They reported yes to feeling unsteady or having a fall within the past year, or they're concerned about falling, which we know if folks answer yes to any of those questions, that already elevates their risk of falling. Over the previous 6 months, they had not participated in any falls prevention program. They didn't have any lower extremity or spine injuries or surgeries. They had intact protective sensation in their feet. They did not have a cognitive deficit. They had no vestibular disorders, and they had no lower extremity amputations. So these individuals, I would say, are at a risk for falling. They are going to benefit from our services as fitness forward providers, but they did not receive, physical therapy or anything along those lines. They literally had a progressive wear schedule of a minimal style shoe. The shoe that they wore was a Zero Aptos XERO. It's just a very simple slip-on shoe, which they wanted to use a slip-on shoe to make sure everyone could don and off the shoe. So they had they started at 0 weeks, 8 weeks, 16 weeks. They did ultrasound to look at the size, the cross-sectional area of their foot intrinsic muscles. They did subjective interviews to get an idea of their perception. A part of the bigger study I mentioned, they were also doing, mini best tests. They were measuring their navicular drop and doing some of those other outcome measures that I mentioned previously. This study, though, that I'm speaking to just published the cross-sectional area and then people's perceptions from the subjective interview. All right. So let's talk about the results and the implications for us and why we want to know this stuff. So the first thing is, in older adults, perceptions really matter, right? It matters if I perceive a situation to be dangerous, because that's going to influence my performance, probably going to impair my balance. 70% of the folks that were in the study report a positive experience and perceptions of improved balance, strength, foot awareness, and sensation. So 70% of these folks perceive that they had improved their balance, their strength, and their foot awareness and sensation. That really speaks to me, because if I'm working with someone that believes that they're getting better, right? They have these positive expectations. I want you to think about the folks that you work with and what that has done to their life, to the decisions that they make, their overall mood, their overall perception on the future, right? It's a very positive thing when people are perceiving progress. We'll see this a lot at the gym that I work at, Stronger Life. It's a gym for folks over 55 in Lexington. And man, when people see progress, whether it's their row time, ski time, their deadlift 1 rep max, for example, it changes things and it really influences their day-to-day decisions. And often it really gets the ball rolling on so many different lifestyle behaviors and changes. They're going to continue to move the needle in terms of their overall health. And so when I read 70% of these folks had a positive experience, they perceived improvements in these functional outcome measures. Now, albeit they weren't aware of any changes of the objective measures, this is just what they perceived. That's a really, really good thing. And for me, that's a definite drop in the bucket of, I'm going to probably recommend, the minimal footwear to individuals if they're curious about it. So they have positive perceptions. Now, what about the other 30%, right? Because there's 70% have positive expectations, 30% had neutral or negative. Around 23% of the overall group reported an aggravated, pre-existing pain or a new pain as a result of wearing minimal footwear. What was interesting was the vast majority of folks that reported the increased pain were folks that did not follow the recommended wear schedule. And I think this is what we've seen in the running world, right? It is really important that we have a progressive on-ramp of exposure to the stimulus that a minimal shoe can provide, right? If I'm a runner and I'm regularly going out and, putting in, 40, 50 miles a week, and I say, oh, I'm going to go buy those new Zero shoes, and I swap out my Hokas for a pair of Zero shoes and continue that same mileage, I'm likely going to have some issues, right? It's probably won't get away free and clear. There's going to be some problems most of the time, right? Not all the time, but most of the time. Same for older adults. Even if it's casual walking, just spending time, day to day. If they're used to wearing more of a traditionally shod shoe, then they go to minimal based shoe. They're going to have that increased stressors, increased impact in those areas, and they're likely going to have some type of ache or pain or exacerbation. And so this really speaks to the on-ramp. And what this study did, and they published their wear schedule, and I'm going to drop a link to that in the comments. If you want the link directly so you can click it like on Instagram, just shoot me a message. But they published their wear schedule. I'll read it super quick. So for weeks 1 and 2, they wore the shoes for about 30 minutes a day. They gave a little more detail of, specifically, it was 3 10-minute walks. So they had these bouts of ambulation, but they also had kind of a daily goal. Weeks 3 and 4, it was an hour and a half a day. Weeks 5 and 6 was 2.5 hours. Week 7 was 3.5. Week 8 was 4.5, so on and so forth. By the time they got to week 11, they were expected to wear their shoes for 7.5 hours a day, all the way to week 16. And I imagine the study that they're going to publish that follows these folks over a full year, I imagine they'll be in that 7.5 range probably for the majority of that year. And so based on previous studies that were done with older adults, this seemed to be a more conservative progressive wear recommendation compared to some other studies that have used kind of 4 hours a day, not up to 9 hours a day, like right out the gate. So this progression, kind of that view of the on-ramp, I think can be very beneficial. And it may not be absolutely necessary for everyone, but you're likely going to prevent some exacerbation and negative experience. So I think it can be very wise to do. You could follow this. I would probably simplify it a little bit. This one does require a lot of planning, But the just overall, time per day, I think is a good place to go. And just that gradual progression could be very, very helpful. So respect the on-ramps there. All right. What is also interesting about this study, which we can't make any huge conclusions, is that 13 out of the 24 individuals, they actually did have an increased cross-sectional area of their abductor hallucis muscle. That flexes and abducts the big toe, but then also is a big medial longitudinal arch stabilizer. Those folks did get clinically significant or meaningful changes in their cross-sectional area. So they had hypertrophy there. Not going to make any sweeping, just proclamations that it's going to impact X, Y, and Z. But when they publish the full study, that's over a year, I think it's really going to point to some potential functional changes as a result. So this study is really interesting. I'm going to link it, but I think the two main things is the perceptions were positive, right? When older adults have positive perceptions and they see progress and they can see the light, bright light in their future, like that changes so much about what they're going to do and influence their daily life. I see it every day at Stronger Life. And man, anytime that we can latch onto that, let's go for it. I think that is a huge point for recommending minimal footwear in older adults. Also, it can be done in a safe manner if we respect the on-ramp. When we have individuals that are used to a certain shoe, a certain type of stressor, we need to respect that and provide a progressive wear schedule, just like if you were to prescribe a resistance training, right? You're not going to go out 5x5, 85% 1RM on deadlifts, out the gate on day one when they've never touched a barbell before, right? You're going to be progressive in nature. This is the same thing. It is a stressor that we're applying to the body. So we need to give the body the signal, but also the ability to adapt. All right. So I'm going to drop a link to this in the notes. Hit me up if you want the clickable link. But I think it can be very helpful for us because you are going to get more questions about this. I know many of the Stronger Life members are getting some pretty consistently targeted ads from Zero Shoes that they're relentless in getting in front of these folks. And so I'm getting more and more questions about what do I think about some of these shoes. So now you've got a little bit of evidence to say something to your folks. All right, before I go, I do want to mention we have our last round of MMOA online courses coming up. So our level 1 course is starting on October 16th on Wednesday. Our level 2 course is starting on October 17th on next Thursday. These courses are for those rehab and fitness professionals that want to better serve older adults, that want to be the go-to providers and be able to handle whatever walks into your door or whatever you walk into in the hospital room or someone's home. Level 1 covers foundational principles, and then level 2 applies some of those principles to more complex scenarios and situations. Those are a part of our ICE certified specialist for older adults if you complete level 1, level 2, and then our in-person live course. All right. So check out those courses. We also have several live courses coming up this upcoming weekend. We're in Highland, Michigan and Paoli, Pennsylvania, October 12th and 13th. And October 19th and 20th, we're going to be in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Fountain Valley, California. So we hope to see you on the road. Appreciate y'all. Have a lovely rest of your Wednesday. I'll talk to you soon.